I was scrolling through the hellhole that is the Google Recommend Articles page on the Chrome app and saw an article called "Sorry Millennials, but Jurassic Park was never a good movie." I get this is a clickbait article supposed to get people to complain about the bad takes on Twitter so it gets a lot of traffic, but something about this article just got to me. I think it was the combative nature of the thing. It would be one thing if it was, "I don't like Jurassic Park, here's why," or even, "I'm tired of pretending to enjoy Jurassic Park." But that doesn't get clicks. Regardless of that, I enjoy Jurassic Park a lot. Growing up, I would watch it frequently, but I don't think it's a perfect film. Despite its flaws, I would say calling it anything less than a really solid flick is gonna take some serious backing. The assertion had a relatively high audacity. I guess the joke is on me because I did click the article, which was exactly the plan for the dumb name.
They played us like a damn fiddle!
The difference is I don't think they planned on someone actually reading it. I read the whole thing, despite knowing it was a simple flame piece that was churned out because of the release of Jurassic World Dominion. And yet, for some reason, I feel the need to give this text a thorough analysis. I have no compulsion to white knight Jurassic Park. Everyone knows it's a good movie. There are countless video essays talking all about that. I just need to go over this article because it has some of the most oddball, baffling claims, not just about Jurassic Park, but about movies in general. Consider all of this just one big copium huff, I guess. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this blatant form ripoff of Plinkett Reviews or YMS Reviews or whatever, all about some content machine article that no one knows or cares about. I really don't think it's the millennials that you should be going after in this situation. While there doesn't seem to be a consensus, millennials are typically defined as people born between 1980 or 1985 and 1996. Jurassic Park came out in 93. On an extreme scale, millennials were at most 13 when the movie came out, 8 on a conservative scale, with 3 years worth of unborn millennials still queued up in the gulag. So the majority of people that have the initial nostalgia for the movie are Gen X. You could argue that millennials would have nostalgia in later years because of the VHS release, but that doesn't really track with the argument here. By titling your article like this, you're implying that millennials were the ones that made Jurassic Park a success. But even if many millennials have nostalgia for the original movie, the only reason it was popular and successful was because of their Gen X parents that took them to see it or bought the VHS. You're attacking the entirely wrong crowd.
It was fantastic. It was so scary.
It really was the most exciting film I've ever seen.
I think if not for the laugh lines in it, people would have had heart attacks.
But they were able to get such a visceral, immediate response. I mean, it didn't say this is an effect. It was like, bam.
Oh, I'm still shaking from it. It's scary.
The thrills never stopped. It was amazing. It was really good. It was a little scary sometimes, and sometimes it was funny.
It didn't seem to bother them. They just pretty much closed their eyes and said, "Wake me when it's over."
It's the best picture I've seen in about the last 10 years.
I'm technically Gen Z, being born in 98, but I have a lot of nostalgia for the original movie. Does that mean I'm just as responsible for Jurassic Park's success as millennials? Of course, we know that the reason it's the millennials' fault is because they are the ones that will make a ruckus online and get this article on the trending page. A big underlying theme of this article is that exposition is bad.
The main problem with Jurassic Park emerges in the next scene as men discuss insurance and divorce and inspections. Whatever menace Spielberg evokes in the opening dissipates over the next 40 minutes as he crams in reams of Michael Crichton's exposition from the novel. The first of many occasions the director drains the suspense in this manner. Nothing is less inherently cinematic than people talking to each other. Hitchcock famously said movies didn't really require dialogue at all.
I feel like this is a baffling thing to claim, not only because Jurassic Park is one of the peak examples of how to give exposition in a smart and interesting way, but there's no rule against exposition in movies. Information needs to be conveyed in order for both characters and audience to understand what's happening, and sometimes exposition is the most efficient way to do that. The haphazard quoting of Hitchcock is especially annoying to me. In case you are curious, the actual quote is, "Dialogue should simply be a sound among other sounds, just something that comes out of the mouths of people whose eyes tell the story in visual terms." But you can make that argument for any sound in a movie. Music is simply sound among other sounds, just something that comes out of the instruments that accompanies the people who tell the story in visual terms. That's the cool thing about a movie. It's a collaboration of all sorts of artistic efforts coming together to convey something unique. Additionally, I would like to add that Hitchcock also famously stated, "Always make the audience suffer as much as possible." So I don't think he should necessarily be considered the paradigm of filmmaking. Let artists make their art how they want to. Crash Bandicoot was not irrelevant simply because of Sonic the Hedgehog's existence, as much as Sega would have liked that to be the case. What is this video about, Jurassic Park? One of Michael's first examples of egregious exposition comes when Dr. Grant is talking about raptors at the dig site in Montana.
He doesn't get far into his disquisition before some obnoxious 12-year-old sneers at it. Who is this kid? Where did he come from? Was he lost in the Badlands? Did he wander in from the Goonies? It doesn't matter. He exists to be lectured at. These early scenes are the first of many in which things will be explained directly to the viewer in long, inherently undramatic speeches using a proxy audience.
Incredible. So you're saying that characters that don't know what is going on, much like the audience does not know what is going on, can make great opportunities for other characters to share information diegetically to both the uninformed character as well as the audience at the same time? Sarcasm about basic writing techniques aside, there's a lot more going on in this scene than Michael is giving it credit for. I'd like to go over this scene, as well as the other scenes that Michael complains about being long and boring exposition, to see how much we learn from them and see if they are as wasteful as our critic in question would have you believe. Of course, there are other scenes in the movie that contain exposition, but these are the ones that Michael brought up, so clearly these must be the worst in his eyes. Let's start with the dig site. Number 1. Yes, dinosaurs are birds. You very cleverly picked up on this one, but I will give it to you that it is important. The dinosaurs depicted in the movie were different from what was shown in cinema before, so this lets the audience know they were going to be in for a different kind of dinosaur movie. Number 2, we learn that Dr. Grant does not like kids. There is no room in his life for a sliver of patience for kids. A simple quip from a tired 12-year-old is enough for him to personally assure the child has nightmares for at least a week. Number 3, Dr. Sattler is very aware of Dr. Grant's distaste for kids, and she thinks it's entertaining. Number 4, we get a display of not only Dr. Grant's intellectual understanding of these dinosaurs, but of a personal fascination as well, maybe even obsession. When the integrity of the velociraptor is called into question, he is quick to set things straight. He not only has done research on how they hunted, but delights in embellishing with gory details. He has a raptor claw on hand at all times, just in case someone needs a demonstration at any given moment. He ends his speech with,
Try to show a little respect.
This is something that he takes very seriously, and everyone around him is gonna know it. Number 5, thinking contextually, a few scenes ago we witnessed some sort of dinosaur take out a park employee. We can start to piece together that maybe it was a raptor, so we are given a little taste of the things that are going to come. So that's 5 major plot points in one scene. Considering the scene is only about 3 minutes long, I would say it did a pretty good job conveying the points in a digestible and at the very least memorable way. Let's move on to the next point of exposition contention.
Once they arrive at the compound, the movie grinds to a halt for its most tedious scene, in which our brave heroes watch a short documentary that explains the plot to them. Here we're treated to the equivalent of the worst attraction at Disneyland. The educational shows on Main Street kids only sit through because their parents make them, while they're itching to get to Space Mountain the whole time. It's the worst, though far from the only, example of Spielberg's preternatural fluency in the language of cinema deserting him in this movie.
Once again, let's break this down by every important piece that is given in this segment, plot or character related. Number 1. John Hammond seems disinterested in the science of everything. His focus is on the show, the spectacle. Number 2, the park is far from being operational, with template music, unfinished scripting, and even technical issues. Technical issues? I wonder if we'll see more of those. Number 3, we learn the in-world science about how dinosaurs came back. Granted, not the most exciting information, but extremely important for the sake of plot and suspension of belief. Number 4, or consider this 3B if you want to be picky, but it's especially important to know that the genetic gaps are filled with frog DNA, which is critical info for when they find the dinosaur eggs out in the wild. I'll give it to you that it's not the strongest thread of the movie, but at least you can't say it wasn't set up. Number 5, the scientist characters are listening intently to the science of what is happening, with varying levels of fascination and even apprehension. The seeds of doubt and conflict are being planted, set up for later confrontation. Number 6,
The blood-sucking lawyer.
is all in on this despite everything. 6 points or 5.5 made in 3 minutes. Once again, pretty good stuff. Something strange this article does at this point is compare Spielberg's Jaws as the objective superior equivalent to Jurassic Park.
Compare this scene to the 25-minute point of Jaws. When we are already wrapped, our pulses flutter with tension that has been building from the first shot. There's plenty of exposition in Jaws too, also sourced from a novel, but it's mostly in the service of what the sharks will do to you if you swim out too far.
So you're saying that extensive exposition about shark kill people is justified, but the in-world science of how they freaking brought dinosaurs back to life isn't? I'm starting to think that Michael has some serious patience issues. Man, if he doesn't like long-winded explanations about in-universe science, I don't know what he could possibly like about Star Trek TNG. Also, I don't know what you're talking about comparing the 20-minute mark between these two movies. In one, the 20-minute mark is when we get the second shark attack. In the other, we get our first look at the dinosaurs. The only difference is tone. In Jaws, you're only supposed to be scared of the shark. In Jurassic Park, you're expected to feel other things like wonder and awe alongside fear. Otherwise, I'd say these movies are extremely similar in how they meter out action and story within the runtime. It's almost like they were made by the same guy! The credit that Michael is willing to dish out when it comes to exposition is as follows.
One of the few effective explaining scenes in Jurassic Park comes when the park's game warden describes the intelligence of the raptors, how these supposedly dumb reptiles can calculate, even strategize, about how they're going to eat you.
Finally, me and Michael are on the same page. Yes, that is an excellently done scene that goes into how the raptors hunt, think, and learn. Although I do think it's funny that you would call them reptiles when a minute ago you were complaining that they spent too long talking about how dinosaurs are more like birds. Someone isn't paying attention. Anyways, just for the sake of being thorough, here are other things that the scene goes over. Number 1, we meet the character of Muldoon, the game warden of the park. Number 2, despite his experience with Dangerous Game, there is apparent uneasiness from Muldoon when it comes to raptors, having never seen anything like them before, conveying how seriously we need to take the raptors as threats later in the movie. Number 3, John Hammond's general dismissal of anything that could be interpreted as issues to his park, between rationalizing Muldoon's legitimate concerns about the raptors to insisting that the topic of conversation stays on what they're gonna have for lunch.
Chilean sea bass, I believe. Shall we?
Hammond feels the need to control the narrative of his park. Number 4, this might be a stretch, but we get to hear the sounds the raptors make, which not only confirms what dinosaur killed the guy at the beginning, but also makes it so when they show up later in the movie, we can feel our fear begin to grow before they make an actual appearance. Including Michael's point, that makes 5 total points in 2 minutes 30 seconds. Technically, it is denser than the preceding scenes, which is probably why Michael liked it so much. Unfortunately, this is where our views deviate once more.
Hungry.
But Spielberg again squanders the tension by following it with a long lunch scene in which everybody lays out various freshman philosophy of science positions.
What are you talking about? That scene is like the entire crux of the movie. We get both themes and characters laid out bare and clear to see. Differing opinions on what happens when man interferes with nature, and the consequences of what happens when they do that. You know? The underlying themes of the whole freaking movie? It is textbook how important this scene is. Without deeper subtext and underlying clash of ideas, it just becomes people running around in a jungle for 2 hours until they may or may not get the bite of 87. This is what sets an interesting movie apart from a smear of noise and colors. Movies need to be given an opportunity to breathe between action scenes. That is what prevents them from bleeding into each other. Whether you personally find these themes interesting or not, that's fine. If you consider these talking points to be freshman positions, that's fine. Regardless of how you feel about what is said in this scene, Michael, you cannot argue that it's not essential for the movie. How are you a film studies teacher? For consistency's sake, let's go everything important in this scene. Number 1, Hammond's ambition is made clear, with further attractions and expansion already planned and underway.
Spared no expense.
Number 2, we get a clear vision of what is important to the
Blood-sucking lawyer.
the money. Ticket prices, merchandising, there is money to be made here and he is giddy. Number 3, Hammond, while ambitious, does not seem to see the park primarily as a money opportunity, but something to be shared with the world. Number 4, Ian Malcolm, our rock star scientist,
Chaotician, actually.
shares his concerns about the role of humanity in nature, responsibility and discipline in science, capitalization of scientific technologies, and natural selection.
Dinosaurs had their shot and nature selected them for extinction.
All important lenses to view the film with. Number 5. Dr. Sadler, our biologist, shares her concerns about the ecological effects of what has been done.
How can you know anything about an extinct ecosystem? And therefore, how could you ever assume that you can control it?
Number 6. Dr. Grant is forced to come to terms with not only his profession as an archaeologist, but as a man.
We're out of a job.
Don't you mean extinct?
His reality has been so radically altered within the past few hours, he can only think of what the possibilities are.
How can we possibly have the slightest idea what to expect?
Number 7. Despite everything said, Hammond simply shrugs his shoulders and moves on to the next stop on the tour. Nothing is getting in the way of his vision. So 7 points in 4 minutes. Let's consider a points per minute score for the exposition scenes we have gone over. The dig site and Mr. DNA scenes have a rate of 1 2/3 points per minute. The raptor cage has about 2 points per minute. The lunch scene has 1 3/4 points per minute. So if we were to rank these scenes based purely off of how much relevant information was in them, and this is to say nothing of characterization or tone or simple entertainment, we would put the raptor cage at first, lunch at second, and the dig site and Mr. DNA tied for third. For comparison, I went through this process for an exposition-heavy scene in Jaws, the penultimate Spielberg movie according to Michael. This is the town hall scene when we first meet the shark hunter Quint. Let's go over everything that is important to the plot and the characters of the movie here. Sharks! Number 1. There is a bounty placed on the shark, sparking competition in the locals as well as people from out of town, bringing in even more fodder for the shark. Number 2. Chief Brody is still primarily concerned with the safety of everyone, doing everything he can to keep that safety. Number 3. The townsfolk and especially the mayor are not taking the shark threat seriously. The town depends on the summer profits. Number 4. We meet Quint, a crusty seaman that hunts sharks for a living. He is smart to the point and a surprisingly good salesman. Number 5. Despite Quint's pitch, it is well established that he will be utilized as a last measure only, seeing as his price is over 200% more than the current bounty on the shark. 5 points made in a little over 4 minutes, giving a 1.25 point per minute ratio. That is technically worse than the Mr. DNA scene, which was described how again?
It's the worst, though far from the only, example of Spielberg's preternatural fluency in the language of cinema deserting him in this movie.
Now look, I'm not here to be hating on Jaws. I love Jaws. Jaws is freaking great. It's one of the few movies from the 70s that doesn't make you want to take a bath afterwards. But if our opposing party Mikey Boy is using Jaws as the example piece, it needs to be made clear that exposition is not the problem these movies have. There is a reason Spielberg is considered masterclass for giving interesting and engaging dialogue, and both movies are great examples.
Coming soon to own on D.
This is me in the future realizing that I should go over the amber mine scene at the beginning.
I'm trapped, and you're putting honey on me.
Number 1, the park is in serious trouble because of the incident we just witnessed. Number 2, Hammond, in the face of this serious problem, chooses his family over dealing with it, which we have come to learn is a mixture of love for his family and an overwhelming drive to avoid addressing the idea that his park has problems. Number 3, an extensive inspection is being planned, with our main character Alan Grant being explicitly mentioned as an important key to the success of the inspection. This is what sets in motion the entire movie. Number 4, they build up a mosquito and amber as something that's going to be really important to the movie, which of course it is. 4 points in a minute 45, making that 2.29 points per minute. This technically makes this the most efficient exposition scene discussed. Yay, I'm spending way too much time on this video.
And now, our feature.
Okay, I think I've explained explaining enough. Another big gripe Michael takes with Jurassic Park is plot conveniences. I tend to find people who take excessive issue with plot convenience to be a bit annoying. Seeing how expecting a movie to have no plot convenience would certainly assure that there would be no plot at all. Without any level of plot convenience, nothing can happen and things stagnate. The key is making the conveniences plausible and understandable. For the sake of measurability, let's say that the definition of a plot convenience is if the audience cannot reasonably understand or rationalize why something convenient to the plot is happening. With this definition, let's consider what Michael finds to be irritating examples of these conveniences and see if it holds up.
He accidentally falls into the silverback.
The scene memorably climaxes with a park worker tumbling into the pen to become Dino Dinner. but the setup feels contrived. The worker only finds himself in this position because he has to climb up and close the gate manually, yet everything else in the state-of-the-art preserve is automated.
I would like to add before we dive in that this observation, and really most of this section, is nothing new. People who have seen this movie more than a few times have mentioned these things.
Let's get back to the point.
What's the convenience here? That a worker would be put in a precarious situation in order to have a scary, thrilling opening scene. Now, to what length does an audience member have to think in order for this to feel natural or justified? Well, most people have been to a zoo or some kind of animal enclosure, and systems like this usually seem to be in place there. So we have real-world counterparts offering validity to this. What about their state-of-the-art technology? There are two perspectives that can be taken here. The first assuming that someone has already seen the movie, and the other being that this is their first time viewing. If they have seen the movie before, they know that Jurassic Park kinda sucks. Their systems and technology, while having a lot of money and research being thrown at it, really is not up to spec on the actual demand that is expected on them. Heck, a lot of the doors we see are manually operated, intentionally designed, or because of programming issues. So whether this is negligence, a logistical error, or simply the park underestimating what the dinosaurs are capable of, you know, one of the core themes of the movie, it doesn't take much of a stretch to accept that this method of getting the dinosaur in the pen would happen. If we are approaching this as someone who has never seen this movie before, it gets even easier to justify. They know nothing of the extensive funding and research that has been put in the park, aside from something about dinosaurs, so this crate method really shouldn't be a problem with no precedent to contrast it with. In fact, you could consider this good foreshadowing about how sucky the park is. When things start going wrong in Jurassic Park because of all the technical issues, a viewer can think back to this opening scene and say, yeah, this park has had a lot of problems since the beginning, hasn't it? Heck, going back to the town hall scene in Jaws again, we see a similar convenience in the mayor not wanting to shut down the beaches despite the rampaging shark. His primary interest is making sure the town has revenue flow, forcing him to make an incredibly stupid decision, much like how the crate system was a stupid decision.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
So sure, upon multiple rewatches, one could definitely think of better systems to get the raptor into the pen. But I would argue that in the context of the movie, it does work without too much limbo. Consider this on a scale of that would never happen to I wouldn't think it any other way as a, yeah, I can see that. I recognize that this wasn't the strongest point of argument on this topic, but we're getting to some good ones.
Wow, it might belong to a saber-toothed tiger or a T-Rex or Pal. This bone belongs to Pal, Arthur. Huh?
When he tries to explain his theory that dinosaurs were more like birds than reptiles, the gathered crowd laughs. Grant insists these folks listen to his radical proposal. Though whether they're grad students or groupies, shouldn't they already be intimate with his work?
Actually, what he says is,
And look at the half-moon-shaped bones on the wrists. No wonder these guys learn how to fly.
you know, a joke? You've heard of jokes, right, Michael? People usually laugh at those. And being a good scholar and teacher, he takes advantage of a good teaching moment. You know teaching moments, Michael, Mr. Film Studies professor?
Look at the pubic bone, turned backward, just like a bird. Look at the vertebrae, full of air sacs and hollows, just like a bird.
With people's minds being focused on dinosaurs as birds, he makes his case. Even if these people are colleagues that are familiar with his work, it is still completely valid for a scientist to utilize what they are currently researching to talk about their studies, especially if it's exciting for them. If a marine biologist was watching a giant squid feed on some fish and was gushing about all the cool things about them, their peers wouldn't be like, "Ugh, we already know about giant squid, why are you talking?" If you're going to pick on anything here being a convenience, focus on there being an entire fully assembled skeleton in perfect form and condition. Now that's the really unbelievable thing.
He doesn't get far into his disquisition before some obnoxious 12-year-old sneers at it. Who is this kid? Where did he come from? Was he lost in the Badlands? Did he wander in from the Goonies? It doesn't matter. He exists to be lectured at.
What's the convenience here? That an annoying 12-year-old is here to be given a lecture about raptors. What do we have to assume for this to happen? Well, for starters, 12-year-olds are pretty annoying, so I don't think we need to worry about that. Why is he at a dig site? Well, there's lots of reasons. Perhaps he's another researcher's kid. Perhaps he's visiting for some kind of field trip or personal education project. Perhaps his parents wanted to check out the dig site and forced him to come, which would explain his bad attitude a little bit. Maybe he was camping nearby and wandered over to see what was up. There are camping areas in the Badlands, apparently. I don't know, man. Kids are freaking everywhere. They're always making more. I'd give this whole scene a score of, I am in no way surprised this has happened.
After the group arrives on the island, Spielberg lingers on Grant's astonished expression until we finally see he's gawking at a towering brachiosaurus stomping and bellowing alongside their jeep. Even if we believe they didn't see it extending above the tree line on their approach, surely they would have heard it and felt the ground shake. Later in the same scene, another trumpeting dino alerts a dumbfounded Grant to the revelation of a nearby herd that, given his eyeline, he clearly already would have been looking at. All of this is, for lack of a better term, cheap directing by Spielberg. And this is before he pulls the same trick twice with the T-Rex. The characters initially can hear and feel the booms and shaking of its approaching footsteps a mile off, but the giant monster is quiet as a midnight prowler the second it needs to sneak up on somebody. Finally, the climax is a cheat. Not only is it a deus ex machina, with the T-Rex saving our heroes at the last moment like the eagles at Mordor in Lord of the Rings, but it again relies on Spielberg's con with sound. Earlier, the T-Rex could be heard and felt deep in the jungle. Here, it somehow manages to get inside a building with no one noticing, which just reminds us that all movies are smoke and mirrors, but this one more than most.
Now, here's the thing about this one generally. I think it's important to give a little when it comes to watching a movie. Sometimes realism can be stretched and maybe even a bit ripped, as long as it results in an overall better way of telling your story or showing your scene. It's still important to keep things grounded in this stretched state, which I would argue is done quite well here. The first scene with the Brachiosaurus seems to work off of the audience doesn't see it, so the characters don't kind of rule. Our cast rolls up in a jeep and then slowly starts to realize what's near them. The audience is kept in the dark with the characters until everyone is fully attentive and ready to see the big spectacle. If we saw or even heard the dinosaurs lumbering about before any characters realized they were there, the overall impact of the scene would have been completely ruined. The same thing can be said a minute later when we see the herds of dinosaurs. We're carefully meted out what we can see and hear until we finally get a satisfying payoff. If the initial reveal was just all the dinosaurs, that would have kind of blown the load, don't you think? Heck, Michael almost figures it out for himself.
Maybe Spielberg was banking on viewers being too stunned by the jaw-dropping visuals for continuity issues to bother them.
Come on, Michael, you're so close! It wasn't Spielberg trying to get away with mistakes by distracting everyone with a jaw-dropping scene. He was actively building something jaw-dropping by loosening the grip of realism. And you want to know something else? Most people are distracted enough by having a good time with this movie that they do in fact not recognize the really bad examples of continuity errors in this movie. The robot hand with the egg disappearing and reappearing, Laura Dern jumping over the same tree twice, the sunroof on the Jeep being broken then fixed in the T-Rex attack. There's tons of these when you look hard enough for them. There are 8 pages of continuity errors that have been cataloged for this movie on moviemistakes.com. If you were to ask me, the worst one is easily the wall of the T-Rex pen. We see the T-Rex at ground level, it steps out of the pen at ground level, but when the Jeep goes in, suddenly it's a 2-story drop? How ridiculous is that? And here's the crazier thing. I didn't see this issue until after seeing this movie a bunch of times already. And even now knowing how silly it is, I ultimately don't care because I recognize that it was a deliberate choice made to make the movie more fun and interesting. The movie is so well put together that people don't notice these goofy mistakes. And even when they do, they don't care. I can guarantee the people putting that 8-page list together did it because they love watching Jurassic Park and found it a fun way to view the movie in a different light. So to sum up, Michael, if you are suggesting that trying to make a movie as engaging as possible, partially so it can cover up limitations, inevitable errors, and writing loopholes, then yes, congratulations, you've blown this thing wide open. Ignoring the argument of Spielberg's integrity, it can still be justified why no one was aware of Littlefoot here until the car pulled up. We see the dinosaur coming out of a tree line over a hill. It was likely obscured until this moment. Off-roading in a Jeep is bumpy and loud, not too hard to imagine it being enough to cover up sounds and ground tremors. Aside from Dr. Sattler, who is busy with the plant sample, everyone is pretty quick to pick up on what is lumbering along the port side of the car. Is this stretching a bit? Sure, but an audience is willing to let that go in return for a well put together scene. Let's give this one a I guess so. I'd say the herd reveal is slightly easier to justify than the initial dino. These people are seeing a giant freaking dinosaur, an animal that has been extinct for millions of years. It shouldn't be surprising that their attention is a bit undivided. I get it. Let's move on to Michael's issues with Metal Gear Rexy. The final scene with the raptors is explicitly mentioned, but let's be thorough and quickly cover the Gallimimus scene. Gallimimus are running, almost trampling Grant and the kids. Rexy pops out of the tree line and snags one. While I would admit that on first viewing it is a bit bit out of the blue, it doesn't take much to consider this an act of an ambush predator. Rexy was in the trees waiting for a flock to pass by and made its attack. Also, the footsteps of a T-Rex, while fairly noticeable, are set up to be a lot more subtle than you seem to be pitching them as. The two scenes that focus on the T-Rex's impact tremors are when it eats the goat and when Malcolm is waiting in the Jeep.
In both, the tremors never cause more than ripples in a glass of water or a puddle, and the sounds are at most a low rumble.
And in both cases, this gets Rexy practically right up to where the camera sits, either to the chained goat across from the tour Jeep, or in the tree line a few hundred feet away from the Jeep Ian is stuck in. One could even consider this a setup for the other Metal Gear Rexy 3 Raptor Eater scene near the end of the movie. I didn't notice anything wrong with it. There are tarps obscuring the entrance, as set up by the second Raptor, so the T-Rex would have to walk into the building to really be seen. We saw in the Gallimimus ambush that Rexy is capable of some level of stealth, and is very fast from both that scene and the Jeep chase. The characters are on platforms that are suspended above the ground, meaning they wouldn't have felt any footsteps until the very end. However, what I think is most important is that the characters might have been a little distracted due to the giant death raptors that are going for their intestines. Okay, reality isn't broken.
Hooray.
Quick! Rewind it!
Before I make a final point here about these conveniences, especially about the Deus Ex Tyrannosaurus, I want to point out that all these scenes discussed, aside from the dig site, are spectacle scenes. The opening incident, the first reveal, the herd reveal, anything that has to do with the T-Rex. These are scenes that are meant to dazzle and entertain first. So with that in mind, the big point I want to make here is that in this last scene, when the T-Rex saves everyone from the Velociraptors, viewers will go along with it. Why?
Because a T-Rex just blasted into the building and started throwing hands with these crazy-scaled cocaine chickens, until it finally eats the last one into a skeleton, then roars as a banner declaring "When dinosaurs rule the earth," falls to the ground!
No one is questioning the logic in this scene. The only thing on their mind is, holy crap, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life. This is a well-earned crowd-pleasing moment, and it well makes up for any faults of reality. Reminds me of another outlandish and implausible, but ultimately amazing and satisfactory ending scene.
Smile, you son of a...
Both of these endings would very soundly rank on our plausibility scale as, who cares, this is awesome.
That character's like, why am I supposed to... What?
We are now exiting out of the objective misunderstanding of film theory section and entering the more subjective bad take sector. Thank goodness too, because the script for this video up to this point is almost 3 times as long as the original article. I don't know if this says something about Michael not doing his research or me putting way too much time and energy into this. Probably both. Seeing as we've reached the waters of subjectivity, I can't say a whole ton to directly combat these sentiments. If Michael doesn't like these characters, then that's his right to do so. What I would like to do is go over his specific thoughts on each character and try to understand where he's coming from. Some grievances are legitimate, many are not.
Alan.
Dr. Grant?
Alan Grant, Sam Neill in the film, was the prototypical Spielberg character from his movies up to then. He's part Chief Brody from Jaws, the everyman with the relatable flaw, here technophobia, part Indiana Jones, field scientist in a fedora, and part guy who learns what's really important in life, Hook, always, Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. Scaring the kid makes Grant look kind of like a jerk.
The first of the two, I think, is very accurate. Good job, Michael. Gold star for you. Yes, Alan Grant fits the everyman role very well. This also makes Alan a very important character, seeing as this movie, like many of Spielberg's works, is about ordinary people coming into contact with extraordinary things. Another thing that makes him a character is that he has flaws. Plural. You pointed out his technophobia, which is true and acts as a setup for events later on, but there is a second flaw that can be hard to notice. If you pay really close attention, you can just make out that Alan actively antagonizes kids due to his apt dislike for them. Scaring the kid does make Grant look like a jerk. That's what we call characterization.
Not to mention, you should find Alan relatable considering you called the kid
some obnoxious 12-year-old.
She's, tenacious.
You have no idea.
Scaring the kid makes Grant look kind of like a jerk, but never fear. Fellow researcher and love interest Ellie Sattler, Laura Dern, is there to titter away all of his imperfections, a lilting laugh suggesting what a charmer this long-winded curmudgeon is if you give him half a chance. It's a thankless role. She's supposed to be a brilliant scientist, but nothing makes her happier than the prospect of domestic bliss with Grant. Later, when mathematician Ian Malcolm, Jeff Goldblum, explains his precious chaos theory to her, she giggles and bats her eyes like a sophomore sorority ditz, rather than somebody who has spent half her life in advanced academia.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the best performance of the movie. I think Laura Dern as Dr. Sattler is pretty good. If she needs to be scared, she can be scared. If she needs to be odd, she can do odd. If she needs to do some action with a gun or through the jungle or climbing on suspended dino bones, she pulls it all off. I don't think there's anything that she does that takes me out of it, so to say. On the contrary, I feel she's probably one of the more well-rounded female characters of the era. As an experiment to this, I asked my wife about what she thought about the character. Despite not having seen the movie in a while, the first thing she brought up was that Dr. Sattler, quote, was a badass and got things done. I think that's a good indication of how most people see this character.
The main gripe Michael seems to have with Ellie is how she interacts with Dr. Grant and Dr. Malcolm.
Tittering, lilting laugh, thankless role, domestic bliss, sophomore sorority ditz. He makes her out to be a bimbo. I would argue this is misleading. Her glee when talking to Alan about kids seems to be more for her own comedic entertainment. She thinks it's hilarious to make him uncomfortable by forcing him to interact with Tim and Lex. And for the couple of scenes we have of her teasing Alan about his relationship with kids, we have a bunch of others of her getting excited about extinct plants, seeing a brachiosaurus, or being promised some absolute fat stacks. You say that there's nothing that makes her happier than the thought of domestic bliss, but compare her teasing chuckle when talking about kids with Alan,
Breed of child Dr. Grant could be intriguing,
to her complete exhilaration when she first meets the Triceratops.
Look at that, in tears over a big fat dinosaur. Sure, she's in a relationship with Alan, but it's obvious that part of that relationship is both of them loving what they do, researching these amazing animals. As for her interactions with Dr. Malcolm, on the one hand, the weird flirting and touching is a bit uncomfortable and admittingly outdated.
On the other hand, you're telling me you wouldn't be laughing like an idiot if Jeff Goldblum was talking nonsense to you? I sure would be. Speaking of which, let's talk about the legend himself.
Goldblum tries to bring some flair with his signature scene chewing. I believe Goldblum is a national treasure as much as anyone, but can we finally all admit that the only reason he ever got so much attention for this role is that everybody else in the picture is insufferably generic and bland? Of course, viewers would respond to any character with a hint of personality.
Actually, I think you mean
a deplorable excess of personality.
Jeff Goldblum is a treasure. Glad we agree on that much. I would also agree that he does get attention for this role because he sticks out. Where I have to differ in opinion is why. Ian Malcolm is an eccentric, goofy character that Hammond describes as a rock star. This is compared to a lawyer, to scientists, some kids, and an old man. Of course he sticks out. He's a crazy guy to have around. His unique inclusion I would consider to be a very smart and very intentional choice. If everyone in the movie was like him, it would be overwhelming and the ums and the uhs would get very old very fast. This is why the second movie didn't work as well. Ian Malcolm isn't a main character kind of character. He's a character that works because he bounces off of others.
Me take little piece of cookie found in zillion-year-old rock.
Not much is said about John Hammond, only that the performance is hammy and the Scottish accent is unconvincing. I'm no expert on accents, so all I'll say on that is I never found it distracting. On him being hammy, I would agree, but 3 things. A, it's a character trait. He's an eccentric billionaire who so desperately seeks to be a spectacular showman. Of course there's going to be a level of cheese. 2, what's wrong with a little ham? You were just talking about how much you love Jeff Goldblum chewing the scenery. That is definitely considered hammy in my book. If characters are goofy in a dinosaur movie, I think it's worth rolling with it a bit. And D, it's a freaking Spielberg movie. What Spielberg movies are you watching that don't have at least some level of goofiness with their characters? Yes, Robin Williams' Peter Pan is a very steely, grim figure indeed. I say, this little shriveled brown fellow is quite a bog-standard addition to this family drama. Oh man, I'm bringing it up again. I would hardly consider the eccentric shark hunter Quint in Jaws played as subtle or down to earth. Spielberg loves hammy and over the top. Don't act like this is something inconsistent to his work.
I like to eat children!
Even less is said about Alan's travel buddies in the park, Tim and Lex.
Had the squealing tykes been devoured, the movie would have improved vastly.
I hate to keep bringing this up.
Alan is the jerk for scaring the kid at the dig site, but you're here saying that these kids should have their flesh rendered from their bones? I think someone is projecting a little. I don't even feel like it's worth mentioning this, but obviously the movie would not be better without the kids. There'd be no character journey for Dr. Grant about learning to appreciate kids and reconsider what he wants in his life.
You're wrong, and you're a grotesquely ugly freak. Thanks.
Hey, buddy.
The worst, though, is Wayne Knight as Dennis Nedry, the slobbering jerk in charge of park security who tries to sell out Hammond by stealing Dino DNA. How did this character and subplot make it into the movie beyond the fact that it exists in the original novel? The Spielberg who made Jurassic Park should have sat down with the Spielberg who made Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark and had a frank discussion about the essence of narrative economy. And yes, I get that Seinfeld was the hottest show going when Jurassic Park was in production, but watching Knight on that sitcom in even a minor role as Jerry's adversary, it's obvious he can't act. Casting him here was a serious miscalculation.
Well, that's kind of mean. Any guilt I've had about my jabs toward Michael so far just been lightened a bit. Not to be #1 Wayne Knight stan here, but Wayne Knight is a pretty good actor. Before this, he was in Dirty Dancing, JFK, Basic Attraction. Nothing that would be considered bad. I think he's great in Seinfeld. I don't recall ever hearing people having a problem with him in that role. Usually if Seinfeld-related controversy is being brought up, it tends to drift towards, well... Anyways, since this movie, he's gone on to do other great roles in movies, TV, Broadway, even becoming a pretty reputable voice actor. I will admit that the character is definitely played for laughs in most of his scenes. He does a goofy laugh, puts shaving cream on someone's pie, stammers when he's lying. When he slips trying to get his Jeep unstuck, a Looney Tunes slipping sound effect is played. The movie is definitely out to make him seem like a buffoon to point your finger at and laugh. So I don't think it's fair to blame Wayne alone for his performance. Also, it was actually Spielberg seeing him in Basic Instinct that got him this role, not Seinfeld. He saw Wayne's character sweating at the sight of Sharon Stone's own frilled venom-spitting dinosaur and said, "He's perfect!" As far as the character of Dennis Nedry goes, it was definitely one that got hurt in the book to movie adaptation the most, with his more complex motivations outside of money being cut. That being said, he's still important to the plot of the movie. It's because of him that the computer systems of the park are shut down, which is the big catalyst for all the fun stuff we get to see. Sure, they could have written that there was a big power outage and that's it, but the sabotage from Nedry adds a sense of permanence. Remember, this park has spared no expense. They do have backup generators in anticipation for a simple outage. A deliberate and irreversible system shutdown does a better job of putting everyone's backs to the wall. Another thing this does is it adds a bit of world building to the story. InGen, the company that makes the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, does not exist within a vacuum. There are other competing genetic companies that would love to get their hands on what InGen's doing, which both shows how valuable this technology and science is, as well as shows how irresponsible the people developing it are. I think if Dennis was cut from the movie, there would have been something lost from it. Those are all the characters mentioned. Again, people are allowed to like or dislike any character they please, but if Michael is going to argue that we should dislike these characters like he does, he should find a better way to put it, because what's here just doesn't cut it.
The first time I saw the T-Rex was at Stan Winston's shop.
My kid would say, "Where does the poo-poo come from, Daddy?"
As vitriolic as Michael has been on everything discussed so far, I don't think anything gets the heat quite like Spielberg himself. You know, quick aside, I always kind of find it funny when people blame a director for everything in a movie they don't like.
Sure, they are ultimately the most responsible for how a movie turns out,
but I don't know, it feels excessive sometimes. I don't think we should solely blame Stevie for spelling Stegosaurus wrong in the embryo scene. I doubt he was the guy that typed out the label and stuck it under the tank. Anyways, while this is another mostly subjective section, let's go everything said about Spielberg's competence as a director and see if it holds water to, I guess, my own subjective views on it. Some of these I've already talked about, so I'll be brief on those.
Things feel amiss from the opening scene in which a mysterious dinosaur is delivered to the park preserve. The action is compelling, but not quite up to Spielberg's usual standards. The filmmaking is more chaotic, less fluid than we're used to from him, and the arrangement of amethyst-tinted floodlights in the dark evokes similar compositions at the finales of better Spielberg movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
If I'm understanding where Michael is coming from, he is talking about the slightly shaky camera work both in and out of the cage, and the quick slides and cuts. Now, this may be a guess, I may be stretching it here, but I think that's because somebody is getting eaten by a dinosaur in this scene. It's a very animalistic type of fear, and the cinematography is matching it.
Now let's talk about those lights. It's no secret that Spielberg loves to play with lighting, especially in climactic moments.
Not to mention the scene is at night, so it's fully justified in having floodlights in it. My guess is it's because of Spielberg's work on Raiders and Close Encounters that he learned that a good night scene with harsh lights and shadows can make for some excellent tension and dramatic moments. The alien ship looks more striking at night, the ghostly wrath of the Ark has more impact at night, and the primal fear of a velociraptor attack is better captured at night. You know, Michael, it's okay for movies that you don't like to have similar scenes to movies you do like. It's allowed to happen.
Oh, Jesus! Rich!
Spielberg's boredom with the scenes in which people talk at each other is evident throughout. When Jurassic Park owner and operator drops into Montana to enlist Ellie and Grant in assessing his island, the director hardly bothers to move the camera. Consider by contrast a movie like Spielberg's Bridge of Spies. That film mostly consists of men talking to each other in cloistered rooms, but the master's shooting and staging is so fleet you barely notice how little action there is.
This is another one of the statements Michael has that makes me wonder if we're watching the same movie. If for no other reason than Spielberg's obvious ecstasy in filming the lunch scene with all of those projectors. Certainly boredom is not the word I would think of when it comes to cinematography in this movie.
Camera? Look at that one, Kelly. Look at that one, quickly.
As suggested, let's go over camera movement in the scene where we first meet John Hammond. First, hard pan to John bent over in the fridge, a humorous motion, reminiscent of a Brad Bird kind of editing joke.
As Alan points and yells, we get a ramping zoom in on Hammond's obviously excited face.
We follow Grant walking back into the shot with Hammond, tightening the scene. We get a slight zoom in on Alan's face as he realizes the person he just yelled and cussed at is their biggest benefactor. Ellie whips into the trailer with a quick motion that follows her entry, then is slowly brought into the main scene as she too learns who she's yelling about. We follow Ellie and John into the kitchen. As John explains the island, the camera is pulled in slowly as well as slowly lowered, showing how John Hammond, the only figure standing, is in control of the situation now. We get some back and forth shots between the two parties of conversation, Hammond and the two scientists. As an aside, notice that in Hammond's shot, instead of him talking in a big frame by himself, it is filled with the other people in the conversation, and they give him something to do with the champagne glass while he's talking, so there's never a moment without movement despite the now still camera. The shot is also extremely tight, which is fitting seeing as they are in a small trailer. Ellie asks a prying question, quick pan to Alan asking another. The camera follows John as he offers Alan and Ellie a glass. John takes a step back, opening up the frame of conversation both literally with the camera and contextually with letting Ellie and Alan think about his offer. The camera jumps up with Hammond as he sits on the counter, another humorous motion. Grant and Sattler stand, bringing the camera with them. A little bit more back and forth, then one last shot where they're all together celebrating, showing they're all on the same page in conversation and ready to work together. So yeah, I think saying the director hardly bothers to move the camera is a pretty big slap in the face to anybody involved in cinematography for this movie. Even the most basic of conversational scenes has enough dynamic motion that keeps things interesting. I would go into how this scene compares to a scene in Bridge of Spies, but honestly, I don't feel like doing that.
We just keep following and following, and when we reach the end,
The Spielberg who made Jurassic Park should have sat down with the Spielberg who made Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark and had a frank discussion about the essence of narrative economy.
This quote was in reference to the character Dennis Nedry, but such a bold statement would most likely be applied to the whole movie if inquired further. And honestly, this is one of the few things that I feel Michael says that has some real legitimacy to it. There are parts of this movie that could effectively be trimmed out. The dinosaur breeding subplot doesn't really have a ton of weight to the movie as a whole, aside from emphasizing that
life finds a way.
Lex's arc about being a hacker is set up and paid off in the span of about 20 minutes.
Ellie investigating the digestive stones for the Triceratops is set up and never resolved. The lysine contingency is mentioned then dropped immediately. A lot of loose threads that don't really become part of the greater tapestry. I get that a lot of this is book to movie adaptation kind of stuff, and I'm not saying it necessarily clashes with the core of the movie either. Remember, I'm not here to review Jurassic Park. I'm evaluating the legitimacy of Michael's review on it. If that is a reason for him to not like Jurassic Park, he is entitled to that, so I have to give him credit for making a valid point. Hopefully that doesn't build his ego, because we're gonna go right back to crushing him now.
The movie is also not much to look at, despite a few memorable shots. It lacks the lyrical image-making of Spielberg's most inspired visions. A lot of this has to do with the design of the park itself, the ugly lettering of the signs, the junky-looking computer command post, and the garish primary colors on the cars and elsewhere.
Congratulations, Michael, you found the joke! It's a POS theme park run by people that have no clue what they're doing, and that's why everything goes wrong. This Mr. DNA scene that you so passionately scold for being the equivalent of the worst attraction at Disneyland plays right into the theme, despite having
spared no expense.
Cuts were made in perfectly wrong areas, and it's apparent the second everyone shows up in the park and goes through a dinky little gate that's supposed to keep in crazy, giant, and dangerous creatures. I know this argument seems a little apologetic, and maybe you're not wrong, but that's how I see it. Graphic design and color theory complaints aside, not much to look at? 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 Not much to look at. 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 Sure. Okay.
Can you move it along? I'm all out of time cards.
I've discussed this one already, and the audience is sick of me talking about Jaws in a video about Jurassic Park at this point. Next, talked about this one already. Congratulations, Michael. Welcome to filmmaking. Amazing scene. Wrong opinion. Already mentioned. Next. I've covered this one twice now. We should especially be good here.
Cut, Fred, check the gate, moving on. No, sir, I didn't like it.
Though Spielberg effectively raised the bar with this movie, it's simply not among the director's best.
I guess this is the quote to close this section on. Is this the best Spielberg? I don't think so. Although honestly, choosing a best for this guy would be impossible in my opinion. But if someone came up to me and said it was their favorite, I wouldn't argue with them on it. If you don't like Jurassic Park, Michael, that's okay. I can accept that.
Just don't be a douche about it, Michael.
John Williams! Great.
Neither is this John Williams' finest hour. The composer's main theme is a little too high, a little too brassy, for the dark material, and it lacks the memorably melodic personality of his best work. The scoring in between the main theme is standard issue thriller stuff or typical trilling flutes meant to signify wonder, but how could the music feel anything other than generic, given what Williams had to work with?
I actually have a lot of pride in what I do.
What, you have a lot of pride? Your job is to pump out garbage every year, hoping that some of the garbage stinks less than the rest of the garbage.
Its reputation is bolstered by nostalgia, and it looks better compared to the diminishing returns of subpar sequels, which whip up the anticipation of seeing those dinosaurs again and again, then disappoint with even lamer stories.
Ah yes, it only seems like a good movie because its sequels suck. You're running out of steam here, Michael. You've gone from film theory to opinions to actual crazy talk. Yes, the sequels suck, but that doesn't mean we were gaslit into liking the first movie more because of it. There's a reason there has been so many freaking sequels to this dumb property. The original movie was super successful and well received. Granted, not every successful movie is automatically good. Box office polls shouldn't be the sole judge on the quality of a film, but it does give an indication on likability. Most of the time, people like good movies. Perhaps the true lesson to learn from the bad Jurassic Park sequels is the same lesson to learn from Ghostbusters, Star Wars, or any other movie series that has great first movies and terrible sequels. Sometimes the stars align perfectly, an amazing movie happens, and for one reason or another, that is just impossible to replicate. Lightning in a bottle is internet movie alcoholic and person I am currently ripping off, Mike Staclaza tends to say. Lucas or Disney didn't really do it with Star Wars, Sony definitely didn't do it with Ghostbusters, and Universal didn't do it with Jurassic Park. Even Jaws, a movie we know Michael loves, has terrible sequels too. I guess that means that Jaws is actually a terrible movie, and the only reason he thought it was good was because he saw some terrible 3D sharks hanging out with Ringo.
But its legacy may be that it ushered in a digital filmmaking era in which the magic of the movies seems ever more manufactured.
Considering it seems like Michael feels the need to pump out a top 10 list every other week, I can understand this level of cynicism.
But I'm gonna cue him in on the little secret that movies have always been manufactured garbage.
The exception is the magic he's so desperately looking for. There was garbage and superfluous movie making before Jurassic Park, and there will continue to be after. Don't put that burden on a movie about dinosaurs eating some folks. Digital filmmaking is a tool, just like anything else. It can be used for garbage or for something great. That's up to the people making the thing, or more importantly, the people paying for the thing. And I'm talking about both ends of that. To blame Jurassic Park for why movies now are bad is grossly misunderstanding how the movie business has been since the beginning, and insulting to those who are, despite everything, still making great things today. Most of all, and most ironically, to condemn Jurassic Park of this ends up giving Jurassic Park far more credit than I'm willing to bet Michael ever intended.
My thoughts on Keanu Reeves.
Man, I don't know how people routinely make these video essays. I'm tired just after this one.
And this isn't even me covering a movie, it's me covering a short article about a movie. I'm glad I did it. For one, I wanted to try my hand at doing something like this for a while, and after a bit of time, I'm probably going to do another one. Secondly, I've grown a renewed respect for Jurassic Park.
I've always liked the movie, but playing apologetics for it has really made me appreciate it more.
Lastly, and surprisingly, I feel like I've grown some strange admiration for our boy Michael. For as much as I've jabbed and deconstructed his words, ultimately I have to respect him. I think talking to the guy about his film opinions would be enlightening, or at the very least entertaining. If we did talk, we probably wouldn't come to an agreement about Jurassic Park, but I'd like to think it would be an engaging talk about movies as a whole. The guy has been studying and teaching film for 20 years, clearly he enjoys it. I'm the one with the office job making a video essay on the side.
So if by some chance he does ever see this video, I hope he doesn't mind taking some punching up. And hey, if he does, reach out. Let's continue the conversation.
Anyways, those are my thoughts. Please don't bully Michael for his bad opinions. We're all entitled to them. Here's one of mine. Big Chungus is still funny.